Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The British contender Dillian Whyte has reaffirmed that any talk of an Anthony Joshua fight is just that, saying negotiations with Joshua are dead and he's moving on, and he's targeting Dominic Breazeale. So Whyte, he was on the broadcast of the Cheeseman and Garcia. He was there supporting his fighter, Fabio Wardley. He's managing his career. Wardley did get a first-round knockout. If you haven't seen that, I've got a clip up on my Twitter account at boxing_squared. And in between one of the fights, Whyte was asked about, well, what's happening with you? Are you going to be fighting Joshua or are you fighting someone else? What are you actually doing? And he told the broadcast, look, the Joshua fight is dead. It's not happening at the minute, so we move on. The good thing is I'm in a position where I've got options. We wanted the fight. I think they wanted the fight as well, but sometimes negotiations break down. I believe I have a certain value, bring a certain value to the fight. I need belief that this is what he wants to give me. Negotiations in business are difficult. The fans don't really see the ins and outs of that. We move on. I fight April 20 here. He was meaning the O2, that's where he was speaking from. Hopefully against Dominic Breazeale, Alexander Povetkin, Luis Ortiz, or one of those guys. Let's see what Eddie can deliver in the next couple of days. I would fight Dominic Breazeale because he's a big guy, only lost once, and he is the WBC mandatory challenger. Even though I am number 1 for almost 2 years, he is number 3 and the mandatory. I don't understand. We want to get to the bottom of that situation once and for all. So those were Dillian Whyte's words on the Sky Sports broadcast of the Garcia and Cheeseman card, and that was at the O2 Arena. And if you haven't caught that card, the main event, Ted Cheeseman took a bit of a battering in the end, but that guy's got a hell of a chin. But Garcia certainly surprised a lot of people in that fight. And Fabio Wardley, the heavyweight, he looked decent in his fight, but it was against limited opposition in the form of Morgan Tissot. But Dillian Whyte is guiding Wardley's career, so we'll have to see where he goes. He advances to 6-0. But I digress. So getting back to Dillian Whyte and his comments on that card. No real surprise. He'd already said, you know, the fight was dead, and we've heard that Anthony Joshua and Jarrell Miller from reports have agreed to terms that the Wembley date is gone. And they were talking about a potential Joshua fight with Whyte for maybe May or June, but Whyte has ruled that out, saying things are dead, it's not happening at the minute, so he moves on. And he's looking to move on against Dominic Breazeale, Luis Ortiz or Alexander Povetkin. Specifically, Dominic Breazeale, if he can get him. And what do I make of that fight? And I don't want to say out of those three that Breazeale is the easiest. I mean, maybe I should more say it's the most winnable of those three fights. Perhaps presents, fewer risks than the other guys who are, decent movers, good counter punchers. Whereas Breazeale, for all his punching power, and he hits very hard, he is very hittable. His defense is extremely leaky. We saw that recently against Carlos Negron. Negron was looking pretty good for long stretches in that fight. But as Negron found out, and as did Izu Agona before him, that was in their 2017 fight, Breazeale hits hard, and if he catches up with you, you feel it, and you can be out of there. And that is really Dominic Breazeale's ace in the hole, along with, he's got a lot of heart and he's got a decent engine. He keeps coming. If you can't put him away, he will keep coming. He only has the one loss, and that's to Anthony Joshua. And you can kind of see with a Dominic Breazeale fight, it serves multiple purposes here for Whyte. It allows Whyte to build another comparison, a common opponent with Anthony Joshua. He's already got one of those in Joseph Parker. He beat Parker just as Joshua did. And in terms of Dominic Breazeale and Anthony Joshua, Joshua really put a battering on Breazeale, took him out in 7 rounds. So if Dillian Whyte was to face Dominic Breazeale, he would be looking to put the hurt on, get him out of there. And obviously the other part of it is he could potentially claim the WBC mandatory status. And if that's not on the line, because it's going to be dealt with by the WBC should Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder rematch, it might actually be an interim title on the line there. Dillian Whyte is the #1 contender. If there's any interim title created to take care of Dominic Breazeale's mandatory status in the WBC, well, Dillian Whyte is Johnny on the spot, so he could potentially be fighting for some form of interim title. And if they have it in the UK at the O2 in April, it will be on pay-per-view. And Dominic Breazeale, he has previously indicated publicly a number of times he'd be open to fighting Dillian Whyte. Right now, Dominic Breazeale has been spinning his wheels for the last year or so. That Carlos Negron fight was his first fight since November 2017. That was December 2018 against Negron, and he's looking to stay busy, stay active. He wants to do something. He's got a family to feed. He's a prize fighter, and he hasn't been fighting. So a Whyte fight for Breazeale outside of a title shot, that on pay-per-view in the United Kingdom, it's probably the most attractive option in terms of a payday that could be out there for Dominic Breazeale. So you'd imagine it would be quite an attractive option for Breazeale to take up. Plus, if, it potentially may be ordered by the WBC anyway, so there could be, a bit of serendipity here that all things could fall together. That fight could end up being for an interim title of some sort. Plus, also, like Whyte says, it will clear up that strange situation where Dominic Breazeale, who is the WBC mandatory, but is rated lower than Whyte. And it was murky circumstances how he got that anyway. But he's not actually number 3, as Whyte said. He's number 4 in the WBC right now. Behind Whyte, behind Tyson Fury at 2, and even behind Luis Ortiz at number 3. So Dominic Breazeale, Dillian Whyte, it is a fight to make, especially if Dillian Whyte wants to really pursue this option of going down the WBC route, going down the Wilder route, even though Wilder has said he will make him wait, all that sort of stuff. Dillian Whyte does seem determined to keep pressing on down that route. But if Dominic Breazeale is not available or turns down the fight, isn't interested, which I think there is a high chance he would want that fight, especially given it will be on pay-per-view, and if they end up having a reasonably even split of the pie, Dominic Breazeale could walk away with a decent payday. There's no guarantees in that fight, though, because Dillian Whyte, he has been hurt before. We've seen him knocked out against Anthony Joshua. We've seen him down against Joseph Parker later in that fight. And Dominic Breazeale, if he catches up with you, you're going to know about it. And Dillian Whyte, even in the fight against Derek Chisora, he was behind on 2 of the cards, and he was trying to box and move a bit. Ultimately, he got that knockout that he was looking for, and that's put him in the position that he is now, which is he has options. And Breazeale, a pay-per-view fight, April the 20th at the O2. It could be the next fight. But I guess the thing is, though, so he was saying he wanted 14 weeks for Anthony Joshua for a training camp, but for Dominic Breazeale, what does he only needs about 10 weeks or so. That's about the length of time before you roll around to fight week. But I guess, there's levels to boxing, and Anthony Joshua is a different kettle of fish to Dominic Breazeale. But I'd note also, he only had a 5 or 6 week camp for Joseph Parker. And Parker, obviously, that was a very tough fight as well. And in that broadcast, the Sky Sports broadcast on the Garcia and Cheeseman card, Dillian Whyte was a bit more conciliatory. He was a bit more measured in some of his statements. There wasn't some of the sort of anger that we have seen in interviews and the way that he's been talking. And he has to, if the Joshua fight's gone now, he's got to continue working with Eddie Hearn if he's staying with Eddie Hearn. And that's what it seems like from what he's indicating, that he will remain with Eddie Hearn at least for this next fight. And, if that fight's not there and he has to look to something else, well, he can't be just holding a grudge against Hearn in public because, those sorts of cracks in a relationship are never good and become a bit, unseemly after a while. But Dillian Whyte looking at Dominic Breazeale first and foremost. Alexander Povetkin and Luis Ortiz, the other options. I would say Povetkin would be quite a makeable fight. If Breazeale isn't there, Alexander Povetkin was already looking and targeting a return to the ring in London in about April. That was what he'd previously said. So he's probably been doing everything in his planning for that date, aiming towards that date. And if he was to get Dillian Whyte, well, that's another common opponent with Anthony Joshua. And if he can get another win, he's got another pay-per-view under his belt, then he starts to ratchet up that commercial value a little bit more, closer to what he probably wants to get against Anthony Joshua. And Luis Ortiz, he's got a fight scheduled in March the 2nd in New York. So perhaps out of those 3 options, Luis Ortiz is perhaps the least likely just because he's going to be fighting the previous month. And against Christian Hammer, that could go rounds. And so Luis Ortiz, will he be ready? It would be a quick turnaround. And, there would be people who would accuse Whyte of sort of shortchanging Ortiz on a camp if he was to have a fight on April 20th and to agree to terms. And you never know against Christian Hammer. He could get taken rounds, get a cut. You just never know what could happen. And a month turnaround, it just may not be enough. So I think Luis Ortiz is the least likely of those three options. Dominic Breazeale, he does look like a clear winner, and Breazeale's indicated he's open to that fight. We'll have to see what he says now publicly. We may not hear from him. We may just get the fight announced in the next few weeks. We'll have to see. Povetkin, that potentially, given Matchroom has been working with Povetkin's people, it's a makeable fight. Luis Ortiz is looking for any big fights right now. He has been interested in facing Whyte. So maybe even at a month's notice, potentially he would take that on. I guess it depends how he comes through against Christian Hammer. But even then, you know, would they be able to make that fight just because he has that fight coming up? You know, that could be a barrier. You don't want to be booking the date and having a provisional opponent because if Ortiz got knocked out or got injured or whatever, or needed extra time to heal from a cut, you know, it would throw Dillian Whyte's plans into disarray. But Dominic Breazeale, yeah, definitely an interesting option. And going down the WBC route, that's something that Whyte appears to be still interested in, despite, you know, having found roadblocks in that sanctioning body in recent times. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment. Loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.